The autumn wind tore across the Dakota Territory, like the cry of a wounded animal dragging with it the sharp sting of gunpowder and the shrill screams of dying horses. May Arden pressed her cheek hard against the splintered planks of the overturned stagecoach, her arms locked tight around 9-year-old Jude and 8-year-old Clara, as bullets sliced through the air above them, like furious hornets hunting flesh. "Mama, I'm scared," Clara whimpered, her small body shaking violently against May's chest. "Shh, baby. Stay low. Don't make a sound," May whispered, forcing her voice to stay steady. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure the men outside could hear it from half a football field away. Fear coated her tongue with a bitter metallic taste as she listened to heavy boots crunch through the wreckage of their scattered belongings. "Driver's dead as dirt," a rough voice said casually. "Check what's left of the cargo." May squeezed her eyes shut as nausea rolled through her. Cal Boone, kind, talkative. Cal had shared his food and stories with the children all the way from back east, trying to make the endless ride easier. Now he lay face down in the dirt, unmoving. His weather-beaten hands were still locked around the reins he would never let go of. The stagecoach door was ripped open with a shriek of tearing metal. Rough hands yanked May by her wool shawl and dragged her into the harsh afternoon light. 4 armed men waited, smiling like wolves. Their leader stood tall and lean, blue eyes, cold, his expensive clothes looking out of place on a man who made violence his trade. "Well now, Mrs. May Arden," he said, tipping his hat with mocking politeness. "You saved us a long ride into town." May staggered upright and planted herself between the gunmen and her children, who stayed curled inside the wrecked coach. "Take what you want," she pleaded. "Just don't hurt my kids. They didn't do anything." The man laughed, his voice sharp as winter rain. "Innocent. There ain't been innocent here since the first white man stepped on Apache land. But don't fret about your little ones. We're after something worth more than whatever trinkets you're carrying." He motioned to a shorter man who began tearing through May's belongings, flinging clothes and personal items aside. When he found her leather travel case, he raised it with a grin. "Deeds are in here, boss." Just like Silas Drayton said. May felt her blood turn to ice. Silas Drayton, the name Eli Arden had spoken with growing concern in the weeks before his fatal fall at Owl Canyon Bridge. How could Drayton have known her route, the timing, that she'd be carrying? The deed before the leader could speak again, another voice cut through the tension. Quiet, firm, unstoppable. "Step away from the woman." The command came from the tree line, spoken in accented English that carried absolute authority. May turned and saw a tall figure emerge from the shadows, moving with the easy balance of a man who belonged to both wilderness and danger. His dark hair was braided with leather ties, his buckskin jacket worn but carefully kept. In his hands rested a Winchester, 1873, held with the relaxed confidence of someone who had survived by it for years. Kairos May breathed. Recognizing the Apache scout who had traded fairly with Eli, sharing coffee and quiet talk by their cabin fire during long summer evenings. The lead gunman's hand barely reached his pistol before Kairos's rifle thundered. The first shot struck center mass, spinning the man backward. The second dropped his companion before the echo faded from the canyon walls. The remaining 2 attackers fled, spurring their horses hard toward the hills, leaving their dead without a second glance. Moments later, only the wind remained whispering through the wreckage. Kairos advanced carefully, rifle ready, but no longer aimed at May or the children. His moccasins made no sound on the stone. His dark eyes scanned everything, sharp and watchful. "Are you hurt, Mrs. Arden?" he asked. His English was precise, learned through necessity. I don't think so," May answered. She glanced down at her torn dress and dusty hands, then back to the coach. "Jude, Clara, it's safe now. Come out slow." The children crawled free like frightened animals after a storm. Jude tried to stand tall, but his lip trembled as he stared at the body in the dirt. Clara clung to May's skirt, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her face. Kairos knelt by the fallen men, checking them with the calm skill of a seasoned hunter. Finding no signs of life, he whistled softly. His paint horse stepped from the trees, as if summoned by spirit alone. The driver May asked, dreading the answer. He was dead before they fired at you, Kairos said quietly. Bullet through the heart. He died fast. No pain. May Arden shut her eyes and whispered a prayer for Cal Boone's soul. When she opened them again, Kairos was crouched near the busted wheel of the stagecoach, examining it like a man who understood both the language of machines and the scars of ambush. This wasn't no accident, he muttered at last, eyes narrowing. Somebody knew you'd be on this trail today, knew exactly what you'd be carrying. The realization hit May like a kick to the chest. The whole thing, the ambush, the timing, the spot had been set up. This was no random gang of highwaymen. Someone back in Willow Springs had sent word to Silas Drayton's men. They knew she'd left her mother's house early. They knew her route. They knew she'd have the deed. But Howie only decided to head home yesterday morning, after Sheriff Rook Lyle's letter came about, settling Eli's debts. Her voice faltered. Kairos' face darkened. Word travels fast when the right ears are paid to listen. Can you ride? He asked. May nodded, even though her knees still buckled beneath her. The kids, too. If we have to, he said. He hoisted Jude up behind him on the paint horse, then lifted Clara to sit up front, where she could hold the animal's mane. Hold tight to my belt, boy. No matter what happens, don't let go. As they made their way toward Willow Springs, May walked beside the horse, one hand gripping the bridle, the other clutching the fear in her chest. Her thoughts churned. Eli's strange fall from the bridge at Owl Canyon. The sudden claim of debts she'd never seen. Now this ambush surgical in its planning. Someone wanted her out of Dakota Territory for good. Someone was willing to kill a mother and orphan, 2 children for 30 acres of scrubland and a trickle of spring water. But why? What was so special about that patch of dirt? Willow Springs lay sunken in the valley ahead, little more than a scatter of warped wood buildings and muddy streets that turned to rivers with a good rain. There was Hartwell's General Store with its hand-painted sign and false front, the Sable Junction Hotel where drummers and drifters paid 4 bits for a bed and bad stew, Doc Ray's modest office with its crooked sign, and the schoolhouse where Tessa Lane taught 6-year-olds alongside teenagers. Beyond it, the Copper Gulch mine, gnashed into the red hillside, its timber scaffolds and pulley wheels grinding day and night as hard men clawed out silver and copper ore. The whistle at 6 in the morning started the day shift. The one at 6 at night signaled the brave or the desperate who worked by lamplight. May and Eli had come to Willow Springs 18 months earlier. He'd believed in the homestead law, believed they could build something real. Their claim was smaller, just 30 acres. But it was bought fair and square from a homesteader who'd given up after a brutal winter. The land wasn't much, but it had a spring. A good one, flowing year-round from underground. In a land like this, that made all the difference. Eli had done it all by the book, filed the right papers, paid the fees, secured a witnessed deed. The property lines were clear, and the spring was right there in the survey, a reliable flow, 50 gallons an hour, perfect for homesteading. And now, it was the reason they were being hunted. Their cabin sat in a clearing about a quarter mile from that spring. Eli had built its strong, thick log walls, a stone foundation, a roof with shake shingles instead of sod. He'd even freighted glass windows in from Deadwood, a costly luxury, but one he'd been proud of. But Eli Arden was gone now, dead. Just 2 months ago, Sheriff Rook Lyle had called it an accident, a drunken fall off the trestle at Owl Canyon. Only May didn't buy it. Her husband was no heavy drinker. A beer after work, maybe a sip of whiskey when traders stopped by, but never enough to stumble off a bridge he'd crossed 100 times sober. The morning after the attack, May sat in Doc Ray's office flinching as he examined her shoulder and ribs. Doc Ray was a lean, deliberate man in his 50s, with steady hands and a voice shaped by East Coast education. He wrapped her ribs in fresh cotton bandages with care. "You're lucky, Mrs. Arden," he said. "Bruised but not broken. The kids are all right too, physically at least, though they might carry the fear with them a while." May hesitated, then asked the question that had gnawed at her since the fall. "Doc, what do you know about my husband's death?" Ray's hands stopped moving. "I examined the body. Injuries were what you'd expect from a fall, broken neck, fractured skull. Death was immediate. But did he seem drunk? Like the sheriff said?" Doc Ray finished the wrap and tied it off before he answered. "There was alcohol on his breath, sure, but not enough to make a careful man slip like that." I told Rook Lyle my doubts. He didn't care to hear them. Before May Arden could speak, the office door swung open, hard, and in stepped Sheriff Rook Lyle, uninvited as usual. The man was built like a barrel with graying hair and a mustache that always looked like it had something stuck in it. His tarnished silver badge barely caught the light, and his gun belt sagged from long use. "Mrs. Arden," he said, tapping the brim of his sweat-stained hat. "Heard you ran into some trouble on the road yesterday." Trouble May rose slowly, ignoring the pull in her bruised ribs. "We were ambushed by armed men, Sheriff. They killed Cal Boone and would have killed us too, if it weren't for Kairos." Rook frowned, jaw tightening. "That Apache's been sniffing around places he's got no business being. Makes folks uneasy, him wandering through town with that rifle slung like he's on the warpath." "That rifle saved my life," May shot back. "Saved my children's lives." Maybe the sheriff said with a shrug. Or maybe he was part of it, showing up right on cue. Those people stick together, you know. Before May could rip into him, Doc Ray stepped forward. "Sheriff Lyle, I've known Kairos for years. He's been honest with this community, traded fair, never brought trouble to anyone. Yesterday, he risked his neck for a widow and 2 scared kids." Rook gave a lazy shrug. "Just saying it's a bit too convenient is all." He shifted his weight and added, "Anyway, I came to tell you, Silas Drayton's riding in this afternoon. Says he's got business to settle with you. Concerns your late husband's debts." May felt the blood drain from her face. "Debts?" she asked, voice dry. "Eli never told me he owed a cent, especially not to Drayton." "Well, turns out he did." Rook said his tone like he was enjoying the sting. "Drayton's got papers, real ones. Contracts showing your husband owed for feed lumber hauling. Big total from what I hear." "That's not possible," May said, heat rising behind her eyes. "Eli kept records of everything, every penny." The sheriff tugged at his belt with a slow creak of leather. "Ledgers can say anything a man wants them to. But signed contracts witnessed, filed with the territorial authority, those are what matter in court. You'd best get ready to pay up, Mrs. Arden, or be ready for what happens if you don't." After Rook Lyle left, it felt like the walls of the room closed in around her. Everything Eli had poured his soul into his plans, the home they built, the future they dreamed of, could vanish in a matter of days, unless she could prove the so-called debts were lies. That night they took refuge at Kairos's riverside camp. It was simple but solid, an army canvas tent, 2 horses, and just enough supplies to last a while off the land. Inside, buffalo hides were laid out for sleeping. A small iron stove glowed quietly. Crates served as furniture. His belongings were few, but everything was cared for. His Winchester rifle, a worn Bowie knife, cook gear, and an old tin coffee pot that looked like it had seen more fires than most men had sunrises. As dusk settled in, May stirred venison and wild onions over the fire while Jude and Clara played near the water's edge. Watched over by Lyra, the elder Apache woman who'd arrived with herbs for Kairos's scrapes and bruises. "Why have you never married?" May asked softly. Not out of curiosity, but because the silence had stretched too far and something about him invited honesty. Kairos poked the fire with a stick, the flames reflecting in his steady eyes. After a long pause, he said, After Little Bighorn, soldiers came, not just for warriors, but for our women, our children. They died in snow camps. The ones left, they didn't need a husband. They needed a shield. He kept his gaze on the fire. I couldn't protect both a family and a tribe. I had to choose. May nodded. The pain of his words sat heavy between them. The scars of that battle 5 years ago hadn't just been carved into land. They were etched deep into the living. But now she asked gently, "Now is different," he said. "But old habits stick like burn scars, hard to change." Lyra, who had been grinding willow bark nearby, spoke up in her native tongue. Her words were sharp, serious. Kairos answered in kind, and May caught snippets, names, places. Words she'd heard Eli say when Apache traders came to their cabin. "She says your husband was a good man," Kairos translated. "Paid fair, shared coffee, treated her people with respect." May's voice caught. "Does she think his death wasn't an accident?" Kairos listened to a longer reply from Lyra, her lined face drawn tight, hands gesturing toward town. "She says she was gathering night plants near Owl Canyon that night. Heard voices on the trestle. White men, 2, maybe 3, speaking English." "Did she see them?" May asked, heart pounding. He shook his head. "Too dark, too far." But she heard an argument, then a gunshot, then the fall. She kept silent. Said Whitelaw won't believe an Apache woman's word. The ground shifted under May's boots. If Lyra was right, Eli hadn't slipped. He'd been shot, murdered, tossed from the bridge to make it look like a drunk man's mistake. And if that was true, someone had planned it, calculated every detail. For what? The spring, the land, something valuable enough to kill for. Silas Drayton arrived in Willow Springs the next afternoon, like a man who believed he owned every inch of it and had come to collect what was his. His carriage gleamed black as oil-polished brass fittings, catching the sun, drawn by 2 matched bay horses worth more than most folks made in a year. Drayton himself stepped out dressed like a railroad baron, tall, sharp-coated silver hair, slicked back, eyes the color of ice and just as cold. He wasn't alone. 5 men rode with him, each one moving like he'd rather reach for iron than speak a word. Not ranch hands, not miners. These were hired gunslingers who made their living through fear. At their head was a lean man with a wax mustache and a knife-blade stare. Drayton called him Thad Quill. The showdown happened in the middle of Main Street, right outside Hartwell's general store. Half the town had gathered to watch. Folks had heard about the ambush about the widow, and they came for a show. Out here, drama was currency. Drayton stepped from his carriage with flair, brushing dust off his sleeves like he was walking into a saloon ballroom. In his hand was a fine leather document case with brass corners and a lock that gleamed like a threat. "Mrs. May Arden," he called out, voice smooth and cutting. "I believe we have unfinished business." May stood tall, flanked by Kairos and Doc Ray. Her shoulders squared despite the ache in her ribs. Behind her, Jude and Clara waited, safely inside the store with Tessa Lane, who had closed the schoolhouse early to keep them away from the storm brewing outside. "Mr. Drayton," May replied, her tone steady. "I understand you think my late husband owed you money. I believe you're mistaken." Drayton offered a smile, cold and false. "No mistake, ma'am. Your husband contracted my freight company lumber feed hauling. All told $837. That debt now falls to you." The number hit her like a blow. It was more than they'd ever had in their best year. More than their homestead was even worth. "I've never seen any such contracts," she said. Eli kept meticulous records. He'd never hide something like that. Perhaps, Drayton drawled, opening his case with a theatrical snap. "Perhaps he wasn't as forthcoming as you believed." He drew out papers with embossed seals and signatures, official-looking enough to sway any court. These documents are properly filed with the Territorial Land Office, he said. The debt carries to the estate. That means you. Sheriff Rooklisle stepped in, then one hand resting lazily on his revolver. Law's clear, Mrs. Arden. Widows inherited all property assets. And debts. You've got a week to pay up or Mr. Drayton has every right to claim what's owed, including your land. May's heart thundered. 1 week. Everything she and Eli had worked for could be stripped away. I want to see those papers, said Doc Ray, stepping forward. As a neutral witness. Of course, said Drayton, still smiling full transparency. But as Doc Ray reached for the pages, Cairo stepped in, silent, but alert. He pointed to a specific detail on the survey map attached to the contracts. His finger moved along the boundary lines, tracing landmarks familiar to May. Spring is here, Cairo said in steady English. Inside the fence. But your map puts it outside. May leaned in, heart-pounding. He was right. The spring, the one source of year-round water, had been redrawn on Drayton's version, placed outside the homestead. But her deed, witnessed, filed, and recorded, clearly placed it within their property lines. There's a problem here, said Doc Ray, comparing documents. May's deed includes the spring. This version doesn't match. Drayton's smooth mask cracked for just a second. Surveying errors happen. Frontier land records aren't known for precision. The issue is the debt, not a few lines on a map. Sheriff Lyle stepped in again, his voice lower now. He faced Cairo's, hand drifting toward the grip of his Colt. You'd best keep out of white folks' business, Apache, or you'll find yourself missing a nose. The threat hung there like a match over dry brush. Kairos didn't flinch, didn't even blink. But May could see the coil of tension in his shoulders, and how Drayton's men had fanned out, just enough to create firing lanes. A few townsfolk backed away, others pretended not to notice. Gentlemen, please, said Doc Ray, holding up a hand. We can resolve this without guns drawn. Mrs. Arden. You mentioned your husband kept ledgers. He did, May said, though her mind was racing. If she could find them, if those books still existed, they might just be the key to saving everything. May Arden knew Eli's ledger books were still back at the cabin. She remembered paging through them after his death, searching for answers, searching for something, anything that explained the sudden pressure closing in around her. There had been no mention of contracts with Silas Drayton, no record of freight charges, lumber deliveries, or unpaid debts of any kind. 1 week, Drayton said, coldly snapping his document case shut. 7 days to pay in full, or I'll be forced to pursue legal remedies. I'm not a cruel man, Mrs. Ardenson, but business is business. As Drayton and his hired guns climbed back into the carriage, Thad Quill tipped his hat toward May with a crooked smile. Pleasure meeting you, ma'am. Hope we settle things friendly-like. That evening brought a visitor who upended everything May thought she understood. Tessa Lane arrived at Kairos's riverside camp just after sunset, carrying a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, held tight against her chest like something fragile and dangerous. She lowered herself beside the fire, eyes sharp with urgency. May, she said quietly, I need to show you something. Eli asked me to keep safe, something I should have given you months ago with the funeral, and you leaving town so fast. I swear it slipped my mind. From the oilcloth she drew out a small leather-bound book. At first glance it looked like one of Eli's household ledgers, but May felt it immediately. This one was different. He brought it to me about a month before he died, Tessa said. Told me if anything ever happened to him, I was to put it straight into your hands. May's fingers shook as she opened it. The pages were filled with Eli's precise handwriting dates, names, dollar figures. But these weren't expenses. They were offers, repeated proposals from Silas Drayton, loans against future crops, freight advances, credit for lumber, financing for improvements. Every one of them refused. Declined. CD loan offer, 200 at 15% monthly. Refused freight contract terms, unfavorable. No advance needed for spring improvements. Page after page. 18 months of refusals. Drayton had kept coming back, sweetening the deals, increasing the sums. And Eli had turned him down every single time. The final entry was dated 3 days before Eli's death. CD insists on advancing 500 for winter supplies. Told him, no need. He seemed angry. This proves it, May whispered, breath catching. Eli never took a cent. He never signed anything. Those contracts are lies. Cairo studied the pages in the firelight, his face hard. A man who forges papers, who kills for land, does not stop when truth appears, he said quietly. May understood then. The ledger didn't make her safer. It made her dangerous. The attack came 2 nights later, fast and merciless. May woke choking on the sharp bite of smoke as Kairos's warning whistle split the darkness. Through the canvas walls of the tent she saw the sky burning orange. The cabin was on fire. The whistle came again, urgent, unmistakable. May rolled from her bedroll and shook Jude and Clara awake, pressing a finger to her lips. Outside flames crackled and men's voices cut through the night without fear of being heard. Get the horses, Thad Quill's voice carried clearly. Burn it all. Leave nothing standin'. May's heart slammed against her ribs. The cabin, Eli's cabin, their home, stood 300 yards away through the cottonwoods. The glow was visible even from the river. They weren't just burning the structure, they were destroying evidence. Jude sat up instantly. Frontier life had taught him when silence mattered. Clara stirred, confused, starting to speak before May covered her mouth gently. We have to go, May whispered. Now, stay close, stay quiet. She grabbed what little they had, the ledger book, her Winchester 1873 loaded with 40 cartridges, and the emergency supply bag Kairos had insisted she keep ready. Eli had bought that rifle before coming west, knowing survival here demanded preparation. The children were still in their nightclothes. There was no time to change. Kairos appeared at the tent, opening his own Winchester, ready, his face carved by firelight and shadow. 3 men at the cabin. Maybe more, he said. They set fires on all sides to trap anyone inside. May whispered a prayer of thanks that they hadn't been sleeping there. Can we make town? She asked. Kairos shook his head once. 2 riders on the main trail. They're waiting for you to run to Sheriff Rook Lyle. Of course they were. May Arden knew Silas Drayton was too cunning to leave the front gate wide open. If she ran to town, Rook Lyle would either toss her in jail on trumped-up charges or claim he couldn't protect her from unknown raiders. We take the river, Kairos said, voice low and certain. Cross here, follow the north bank toward Owl Canyon, then circle back to town. It's rough country, but they won't expect it. The river was chest-deep, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains. In broad daylight, it would have been dangerous. At night, it could kill. Still, it was the only way out. May hoisted Clara into her arms while Kairos helped Jude climb onto his back. The boy clung tightly. His arms looped around Kairos's neck, trying to be brave, though his teeth chattered like dice in a tin cup. The water hit them like a hammer. Icy, wild, merciless. May's wool dress soaked through instantly. Hold on to my belt, Kairos told her firmly. Keep moving. Let the current push, but don't let it take you. They waded in together. The freezing water rose to May's waist, then her chest. Clara whimpered, face buried in her mother's shoulder, too scared to cry aloud. Then it happened. A rifle cracked in the night, sharp, loud, echoing off the canyon walls. A bullet slapped the water just ahead of them. There in the river, a voice hollered, Thad Quill. More shots followed, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like angry fireflies. Kairos surged forward, forcing his way through the current. May stumbled the river bottom, slick with mud and stone, each step a fight for survival. Another bullet screamed overhead. Mama Clara cried, terrified. "Hush, baby. We're almost there," May gasped, voice shaking as much as her limbs. Kairos reached the far bank, first pulling Jude to safety. Then he turned back for May and Clara, blood running down his arm, where a round had grazed him. He didn't flinch, just gritted his jaw and hauled them from the river. Behind them, flames rose like demons into the sky. The cabin, Eli's cabin, was a blaze fire, tearing through the roof like it was made of paper. In the glow they could see Drayton's riders, silhouetted against the inferno, watching it all burn. What felt like hours was no more than half an hour when they reached a hidden bend in the river. There, waiting with uncanny timing, was Lyra. The old Apache healer had anticipated the danger, arriving with dry blankets, a satchel of willow bark, and a face set in quiet resolve. Without a word, she cleaned Kairos's wound, binding it tightly. It wasn't deep, but she muttered something under her breath in her native tongue, something that carried warning. "She says the fire was seen from the reservation," Kairos translated. "People are scared. If white men burn a widow's home, what's to stop them from burning Apache camps too?" May swallowed hard, heart sinking. "I'm so sorry. I never meant to put anyone else in danger." Lyra responded without looking up, voice low and firm. "She says danger was already here. Your husband's death was only the beginning. Now the evil walks in plain view." The next morning brought fresh disaster wrapped in legal parchment. Sheriff Rook Lyle rode to the schoolhouse, puffed up like he was delivering justice. In his hand, an official-looking document bearing the territorial seal. "Mrs. Arden," he called out, "by the authority vested in me, by Dakota Territory, I'm serving. Notice your homestead's been declared abandoned." May blinked. "Abandoned?" "We're right here. You ain't been living on the property since the fire," Lyle said, smug. "Territory law says if a cabin burns and ain't rebuilt quick, the claim lapses. Mr. Drayton filed a lawful claim. He's ready to take over and maintain the improvements until the debt's settled." "Improvements," May snapped. "You just said the cabin was gone." "It's the spring," Mrs. Arden, Lyle replied. "That water needs proper oversight." The trap had snapped shut. Now Drayton had legal hold over the very thing that gave her land value. The spring, her husband's dream, their future. But as Lyle mounted his horse and trotted off, May caught sight of Doc Ray standing quietly in his doorway. He tipped his hat just once. A signal. Later that day, Doc Ray met her at Kairos's camp coat, still dusty from the trail. "I've been thinking," he said without pleasantries. "There's a man, Walt Briggs, works the deep shafts over at Copper Gulch. Got the lung fever bad. Won't see another winter." May leaned forward, heart racing. "He was in town the night Eli died," Doc Ray said. "Mentioned something odd. Said he saw Sheriff Lyle and another man walking toward Owl Canyon near midnight, carrying a lantern." What May whispered struck him as strange. "Lyle doesn't go near the mine after dark. Claims the Apache spirits spook him." The other man, a meh. Arden asked softly, "Did Walt Briggs recognize him?" Doc Ray gave a slow, grim nod. "Someone with deep pockets paying to keep mouths shut. Someone who's been buying silence all across this town lately." Reaching the mine wasn't simple. It demanded careful timing and no small amount of nerve. Silas Drayton's business held tight control over the operation, with armed men routinely sweeping the tunnels and surface works. But Doc Ray had arranged a narrow window during a shift change when chaos and motion might cloak their steps. The mine was a jagged scar on the earth's skin, carved by years of greed and grit. Timber scaffolds jutted into the hillside like the bones of some buried beast, following twisted veins of silver and copper. The air hung heavy with dust, thick as fog, and every second echoed with the scrape of shovels, pickaxes, and the groan of ore carts rising to daylight. They found Walt Briggs deep in a spent drift, hunched with a tin cup of coffee, trembling in his hands, racked by a hacking cough that seemed to come from his very soul. 20 years of breathing crushed stone was choking the life out of him. Everyone there knew. Spring wouldn't come for him. A lone kerosene lamp flickered, painting his hollowed features in restless shadows. "Mrs. Arden," he rasped as May and Kairos knelt beside him. "Doc says you got questions." "About the night your husband passed." May's voice was gentle, nearly lost in the tunnel's breath. "Walt, did you see Rook Lyle that night? Were you near the bridge when Eli fell?" The old man's eyes, fever-glossed, still held clarity. "I seen him all right. Him and some other fella headed toward Owl Canyon round midnight. Odd time for the sheriff to be out. Most nights he's drunk and out cold by 10. Did you recognize the man with him?" Walt coughed again, wet violent, and wiped a smear of blood on his sleeve. "Big fella. Fancy clothes, moved like he owned half the territory. Only saw his back, but if I was a bettin' man, and I guess I am, it was Silas Drayton." May's heart thudded against her ribs. "You're certain?" Walt managed a bitter chuckle, certain enough to stake what's left of this old body. He took a shaky sip. "They had a lantern. I heard them talkin'. Sounded tense. Klaus, he kept saying it wasn't the deal they made." Kairos leaned closer. "What were they arguing about? About making it look right," Walt said. "That Drayton fella, he kept pushing it, had to seem like an accident." "No questions," he said. Klaus didn't like it, but he nodded. May's blood turned cold. That was it, clear as day. Klaus and Drayton together at Owl Canyon, scheming to dress up murder as misfortune. "Walt," she whispered urgency in her voice, "would you swear to this in court?" The old miner stared into her face, eyes dimmed by the lamplight. "I'm already a dead man, ma'am. Ain't no fixin' this fever. But I've got a daughter back in Ohio. Been sendin' her what little I earn." He looked down. "If I testify, Klaus'll make sure she never sees another penny." Kairos sat straighter. His voice was calm but sharp. "Does your daughter know how you make your living, know the kind of men you work for?" Walt's face twisted in shame. "She thinks I'm decent, honest labor, not a lackey for snakes." Kairos nodded. "Then speak truth. Let her remember a father who stood for what's right, not one who watched the innocent die in silence." The mine was quiet but for the wheeze of Walt's lungs. Then he nodded. "I'll do it." His voice dropped. "But you best hurry, Mrs. Arden. This fever's coming on fast, and corpses don't make good witnesses." They turned to leave, but fate had other plans. Eli Vance was already waiting at the entrance, face carved with tension. "He knows," the deputy said flatly. "Rook's caught wind you've been talking to Walt." May's stomach flipped. "What's he planning? He wants to arrest Briggs. Come dawn says he's been stealing ore, selling it to Apache traders. Theft and conspiracy." May's jaw clenched. "That's a lie. Walt's too sick to haul anything." "Doesn't matter," Eli muttered. "It's a setup. A trap to discredit him. And if you or Kairos step in, he'll slap federal charges on both of you." He hesitated, then added grimly, "There's more. Klaus got word from the Capitol. Marshal Gage is coming from Fort Abraham Lincoln, bringing a whole detachment. Says it's about the Apache situation near Willow Springs." May's heart dropped. A federal marshal, he could override Klaus, but he'd be fed Drayton's lies. "We need that affidavit," she said sharply. "Tonight, before Klaus can touch Walt or twist the truth again." Using Eli Vance's authority as a deputy, they set the plan in motion. Doc Ray would make an urgent medical call to the mine, claiming a dying worker needed immediate care. While Doc Ray examined the miner, May Arden would take the statement and Eli Vance would witness it. The ruse held right up until they were climbing out of the mine shaft with Walt Briggs's affidavit signed. witnessed and hidden deep inside May's coat. Then everything unraveled at once. Sheriff Rook Lyle stood at the mine entrance, blocking their way, 3 armed men at his back. His face was flushed with drink and fury. Behind him, Thad Quill held an oil lamp, its light throwing wild shadows across the rock walls. "Well now," Lyle slurred. "Look what crawled out of the hole. Deputy Eli Vance, running with thieves and killers." His gaze slid to Doc Ray, treating patients without proper say-so. Then to May, and Mrs. May Arden trespassing on private ground with her Apache savage. May's hand twitched toward the Winchester on her shoulder, but Kairos caught her wrist and gave a single restrained shake of his head. They were exposed. Outnumbered. Sheriff Doc Ray said carefully, "I was answering a medical emergency. Walt Briggs won't last long without treatment." Good Lyle laughed harshly. "Same goes for anyone spreading lies about respectable businessmen." Eli Vance stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. "Sheriff, you've been drinking again?" The blow came fast. Lyle's backhand knocked Eli Vance off his feet, blood splitting his lip as he hit the stone. "You forget who wears the badge here," Lyle growled. The threat hung thick in the air. May felt the affidavit burn in her pocket, the truth that could destroy them all if she lived long enough to use it. But the worst was still coming. 3 days later, May's world collapsed. Tessa Lane met her at the schoolhouse door, eyes red, hands shaking. "He was here this morning," she whispered. "I saw Jude at his desk. When I called for recess, he was gone." The ground tilted. May couldn't breathe. She had been careful. Kairos had been watching the school from a distance until a fight broke out at the general store loud enough to draw him away. Too loud. Too perfect. An hour later, the message arrived, delivered by the same grimy-faced boy who always carried bad news. "Your son is safe, for now. Bring the deed to Echo Canyon at sunset. Sign it over to Mr. Drayton. Come alone. Refuse, and the boy disappears into the deep mine tunnels where accidents happen to small children every day." May read it 3 times before her hands stopped shaking. "We have to give them what they want," she whispered. No, Kairos said, quiet but unyielding. "We get the boy first. Then we finish this." "You don't understand," May cried. "They have my child. My baby." "I understand," Kairos replied, and something in his voice made her look at him again. "Better than you know. Trading papers won't save him. Dead woman tells no court. The truth," he continued. "Dead boy grows up to nothing." Her heart rebelled, but she knew he was right. Then Eli Vance returned, blood dried at his mouth, eyes sharp with urgency. "I know where they're holding him," he said. "Old stamp mill in Echo Canyon. Thad Quill and 2 others are guarding Jude. Lyle is setting the ambush for tomorrow." The stamp mill sat high on stone, overlooking the canyon floor, isolated, defensible, reachable only by a narrow trail, watched from every angle. "I've been thinking," Eli Vance said grimly. "Lyle's already planning to kill me. Says I'm compromised by Apache sympathizers. Figure I might as well make it count." May's pulse surged. "What are you proposing, diversion?" he said. "I ride straight up. Say Lyle sent me to check on the prisoner. While they're focused on me, Kairos comes in another way." It was reckless. It was deadly. It was the only chance. The rescue began at midnight. May hid among the rocks above the stamp mill, heart hammering, watching the dark shape of the building below. Kairos climbed the back slope in silence, moving like shadow over stone. From the front trail came noise, deliberate, unmistakable. Hooves clattered as Eli Vance rode straight toward the entrance. "Hello in the mill," he called out. "Sheriff Rook Lyle sent me to check on the prisoner." May Arden held her breath as the flicker of lamplight danced across the windows of the old stamp mill. Voices floated through the still canyon air, too faint to catch the words. But then Mama. The voice was thin, frightened, but unmistakably Jude's. The plan was working until a single stone betrayed them. A rock slid down the back slope with a sharp clatter. The sound was small, but in that silence it was as loud as a shot. "Someone's coming up the back!" Thad Quill's voice rang out from inside the building, and then chaos. Gunfire exploded from the mill's windows, muzzle flashes lighting up the night. Eli Vance kicked his horse hard, charging the front entrance revolver drawn. But a rifle cracked from an upper window. He went down hard, rolling across the rocks, clutching his shoulder. Alive, but bleeding. Kairos dropped all pretense of stealth. He surged up the slope, Winchester, pumping shot after shot. His long strides ate up the distance as bullets hissed past his head. From her perch in the rocks, May made her choice before she even knew it. She raised her rifle, and began firing, not to kill, but to suppress, to give Kairos the cover he needed. Her shots cracked into the darkness, aimed at the muzzle flashes. One by one, they ducked. Kairos reached the wall, slipped around the side of the building, and vanished. The firefight dragged on. It felt like hours, but was only minutes. Then Mama Jude's voice again, louder this time, closer. Kairos appeared in the doorway, carrying the boy in his arms. Both were covered in soot eyes, wide, breathing hard, but they were whole. Smoke rolled out behind them. Someone had kicked over a lantern in the chaos. Now the dry old timbers were going up fast. "We have to move," Kairos said, reaching May with Jude tight in his grip. More men coming. Heard the shooting. They helped Eli Vance onto his horse, despite the blood soaking his shirt, then made their retreat down the narrow canyon path. Behind them, flames devoured the stamp mill. It wasn't just a building, it was the evidence. Burned away. But the inferno would draw every one of Drayton's gunmen from miles around. By dawn, they were back at the river camp. But May knew the truth. They had crossed a line. They'd saved Jude, yes. But now Rook Lyle had everything he needed to brand them as terrorists and murderers. And with the federal marshal inbound, it would look exactly like Lyle's lies were true. "It's over," May whispered, tearing strips from her petticoat to bind Eli's shoulder. "We can't fight paper lies and bad law." But Kairos wasn't watching her. He was watching the eastern horizon, where dust clouds rose like ghosts. "Not over," he said. "Truth is a weapon if spoken to the right man at the right moment." That moment arrived with Marshal Gage. The U.S. Deputy Marshal rode into Willow Springs that morning, flanked by cavalry out of Fort Abraham Lincoln. His orders were clear: restore order in a territory reported to be overrun with Apache-led violence and anti-government rebellion. Rook Lyle met him at the edge of town, his performance pure theater. The smoke from the canyons still drifted behind him like proof. "Marshal Gage, thank God you're here," Lyle said, playing the part of the embattled lawman. "That savage Kairos and the widow May Arden, they've lost their minds. Kidnapped my deputy. Burned down property. Killed 3 of my men." But Marshal Gage wasn't a fool. Years of riding circuit had taught him one thing: never trust the first story. "Where are the suspects now?" he asked evenly. "Somewhere out in the canyons," Lyle replied. "Armed, dangerous, using her own kids as shields." The lie was perfect. Clean. Brutal. Convincing. But Kairos had prepared for this. Their group was positioned where they could watch it all unfold without being seen, and then the moment came. Eli Vance stepped into view, walking down the slope toward the federal party with both hands raised and his badge pinned proudly to his chest. "Marshal Gage," he called out. "I'm Deputy Eli Vance, and I've got sworn testimony of murder and conspiracy committed by Sheriff Rook Lyle and Silas Drayton." The reaction was immediate and damning. Instead of welcoming his own deputy's statement, Lyle drew his revolver and pointed it at Vance's back. "That man's a traitor," he shouted. "He's been bribed by Apache gold. Stand down." Sheriff Gage ordered, his own hand drifting toward his Colt. Vance's voice didn't tremble. "Walt Briggs saw them, Lyle and Drayton, at Owl Canyon the night Eli Arden died. Heard them talk about making it look like an accident. The falsified business papers, and more damning, Still, his own eyewitness account of Rook Lyle's long-running corruption were laid bare. Eli Vance finished his statement with steady resolve. Sheriff Rook Lyle has been taking bribes to alter evidence and grease the wheels for murder. The so-called Apache troubles he's reported are pure invention. Lyle's response proved the truth of those words more clearly than any document ever could. He didn't argue. He didn't deny. He simply drew his revolver and fired into his own deputy's back. The shot struck Eli Vance square between the shoulders, hurling him forward into the dirt. As he fell, his hand clawed at his coat, pulling free something that flashed in the morning sun. May Arden and Doc Ray rushed to him as he struggled for breath. With the last of his strength, Eli pressed a small object into Marshal Gage's palm. This, he whispered, blood on his lips, is proof. From Owl Canyon. Lyle kept it. Marshal Gage looked down and knew at once what he held. A gold wedding band engraved with the words, May and Eli forever united. His voice hardened. Where did you find this? Eli Vance fought for air. In Lyle's desk. Boxed up. With other things from that night. He kept souvenirs. May stared at the ring as tears streamed freely. It was Eli Arden's wedding band, the one missing when Rook Lyle claimed to have found her husband's body below Owl Canyon, the one he'd said was lost in the fall. Marshal Gage raised the ring high, letting everyone see it, then turned to the sheriff, whose face had gone white as winter ash. Sheriff Rook Lyle, he said, evenly, explain why the dead man's wedding ring was in your personal possession. Lyle answered by swinging his smoking revolver toward the federal troops, but Marshal Gage's shot dropped him where he stood. The sheriff fell beside the deputy he'd murdered, his weapon skidding uselessly across the rock. But Rook Lyle's death didn't end the danger. It made it worse. From concealment above the canyon, Silas Drayton had been watching, waiting for Lyle to neutralize federal authority under color of law. When that plan collapsed, he triggered his final move. The explosion ripped through Echo Canyon without warning, an earth-shaking blast from black powder planted in abandoned shafts. Drayton's intent was clear. If he couldn't own the water rights, he would destroy them, along with every soul who could testify against him. The blast shattered the canyon wall. Rock slides thundered down ceiling exits. Underground streams burst loose, flooding the lower cuts. The mine, Doc Ray shouted over the roar. He's burying the evidence. May understood then this was Drayton's last gamble. Deny justice by denying survival. As they fought through choking dust toward higher ground, Kairos moved with grim focus, wounded but relentless, guiding them along paths only he knew. But Drayton was not finished. Above them, muzzle flashes flared Thad Quill and the remaining gunmen, taking positions to finish the survivors. Ambush, Kairos warned, pointing. Gunfire erupted in chaos. May used every lesson Kairos had taught her, working the Winchester, moving from cover to cover, across treacherous stone. Her first shot found a muzzle flash 40 yards above. A scream followed. Her second shattered rock, forcing the shooters back. Marshal Gage and the cavalry fought their own brutal climb through mud and falling stone, pinned by fire and unstable ground. Then disaster struck. Terrified, Jude broke from cover, running toward his mother's voice. His small figure stood out against pale stone, an easy mark. May saw Thad Quill steady his rifle. She stepped into the open. Every instinct screamed, but she fired. The first shot smashed into Quill's shoulder, spinning him sideways. The second struck center mass, ending him where he stood. Return fire slammed into the rocks. May dove for cover, crashing hard, pain ripping through her injured ribs. Kairos reached her, just as the remaining gunmen broke. They ran not from bravery but survival, mounting their horses and fleeing, leaving their employer behind. Only Silas Drayton remained. And he was stepping out from the shadows. His fine coat was torn, his boots soaked with mud, but his eyes still held the cold calculation that had made him dangerous. Gone was the confident magnate who'd rolled into Willow Springs weeks earlier. This was a man watching his empire collapse and preparing one last move to save himself. May Arden. Silas Drayton called out, his voice stripped of the power it once carried. You've ruined everything I built. May kept her Winchester trained on him while bracing Kairos, who was still unsteady from the wounds and the brutal climb. Around them, Federal cavalry were spreading out, securing positions. Marshal Gage was already coordinating the rescue efforts. No, May said flatly. You did that. You stole everything from me. But now the truth is out. Her eyes flicked to the ring in Marshal Gage's palm, the one that had once been on Eli Arden's finger. Drayton laughed, a bitter, broken sound, not a trace of triumph left. Truth, he spat. You think that little trinket proves anything? I've got lawyers in the Capitol. This ain't over. But May saw it, the flicker in his eyes. He knew it was over. The ring Eli Vance had recovered, damning as it wasn't just a piece of evidence. It was proof of Rook Lyle's vanity and Drayton's failure to control the corruption he'd paid for. Marshal Gage approached with 2 troopers flanking him, Eli Arden's ring still glinting. Mr. Drayton, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud under territorial land law. In a last lunge of desperation, Drayton drew a small pistol, not aiming at them, but at the loose papers spilled near the rocks. His forged contracts, boundary maps, the entire web of lies he had spun. But before he could fire, Kairos's hand whipped forward. The throwing knife struck Drayton's wrist with brutal precision, sending the pistol clattering down the slope. The force of the blow staggered him, and the edge of the canyon crumbled beneath his feet. May watched frozen as Silas Drayton toppled backward, arms flailing. His expensive coat flared like torn sails as he vanished into the muddy river below. Gone, swallowed by the land he tried to steal. Marshal Gage noted it with grim finality. Silas Drayton deceased during attempted escape. Case resolution supported by physical evidence and multiple eyewitnesses. 1 week later, a circuit judge arrived in Willow Springs with full federal authority. Judge Thorne was a man of precision and steel, seasoned by decades of frontier law. The Arden case, as it came to be called, stretched across forged claims, bribery, murder, and federal land fraud. May took the stand. She presented every piece of evidence. Eli's ledger, showing his refusals to Drayton's deals. The altered survey maps. The recovered wedding ring handed over by Eli Vance. Doc Ray followed, providing forensic clarity on the deaths of Eli, Arden Rook Lyle, and Silas Drayton. He testified about the cause of death, the timing, and what truly happened at Owl Canyon. But the most heartbreaking testimony came from Lila Grant, the widow of Eli Vance. Through her tears, she revealed the journal. Eli had kept a record of Lyle's bribes, threats, and meetings with Drayton. My husband died for this town, she said. He knew the danger, but he couldn't watch good people suffer in silence. Judge Thorne's ruling was firm, direct, and complete. This court finds that Eli Arden was murdered by Sheriff Rook Lyle under the direction of Silas Drayton as part of a calculated scheme to defraud settlers of legal property. The debts against Mrs. May Arden are hereby ruled fraudulent and void. Deputy Eli Vance acted with exceptional courage in exposing this conspiracy at the cost of his own life. Kairos, a scout of the Apache Nation, is officially recognized as a territorial peace officer with legal authority under Dakota law. The rebuilding began that same day. Walt Briggs rallied the townsfolk. Volunteers came with timber and tools to help May raise a new home larger than the one she lost, with a solid stone foundation and wide windows to watch every approach. It wasn't just a home. It was a fortress built out of loss, love, and survival. Doc Ray instituted sweeping reforms at the Copper Gulch mine. No more child labor, regular medical inspections, and safety measures that finally made the mine a place to work without fear. Tessa Lane's school expanded with private funding and government backing. It opened its doors to Apache children from the nearby agency school. Classes blended arithmetic and reading with traditional Apache stories and survival skills, a shared future, not a divided one. Most crucial of all, the water rights, what had started this entire war, were legally reaffirmed in May Arden's name. But Judge Thorne didn't stop there. A water use compact was established, ensuring the spring would serve not just one homestead, but the entire region. Peace didn't come easy. It was earned through loss, through fire, and through blood. But it came. The original survey had revealed enough hidden water to sustain dozens of homesteads scattered across the rugged land. May Arden held the legal deed to the main spring, but secondary sources were shared with nearby settlers, fair terms that encouraged cooperation over conflict. And through all the reconstruction, May found herself leaning more and more on Kairos. His steady hand, sharp instincts, and unshakable loyalty. He helped design reinforced features for the new cabin-trained Jude and Clara in advanced survival skills and wove himself naturally into the rhythm of their daily lives. What had started as a desperate alliance had grown into something deeper. Real partnership, real trust. But defining the shape of their future together meant more than feelings. It meant thinking of the children, of what came next. That answer came clear during a community gathering to celebrate May's new homestead. The townsfolk had come together for a harvest feast, venison hunted by Kairos, vegetables salvaged from scorched gardens. As laughter echoed in the crisp twilight and Jude and Clara chased other children beneath golden leaves, May turned to Kairos. "They need roots," she said quietly. "To believe this place will always be here, that someone will keep them safe." Kairos didn't answer right away. He just watched the children, then asked softly, "And what about you? What do you need?" May's voice was low but steady. "I need to know that whoever stays chooses to, not out of duty, not because of some code, but because they truly want to be part of this." Kairos didn't hesitate. "Then I stay," he said. "Not as a scout or officer, just as a man who wants to raise strong children and build a life worth protecting." It wasn't a church wedding or a legal vow, but in the unforgiving lands of the frontier, it was something truer. Two people scarred, tested, choosing each other, not out of need, but because they'd discovered strength in each other's presence. Legal papers could wait. First came chopping wood, canning food, sealing the roof before winter. What mattered most was the choice they made to face whatever lay ahead together, as a family bound, not by blood or law, but by earned trust. When the first snow swept across the hills of Willow Springs, May looked out from her porch and felt something she hadn't known in years: peace. The cabin stood solid, warm, ready. The kids were thriving in Tessa Lane's school, both socially and intellectually. The spring kept flowing, feeding both home and the promise of future crops. But more than that, May had discovered real strength didn't mean avoiding conflict. It meant standing your ground and knowing you weren't alone. The nightmare that began with Eli Arden's death had turned into something no one could have predicted, a chance at a stronger, freer life than May had ever dreamed when she first rode west as a young bride. And in early December, federal surveyors confirmed what she'd fought for. Every drop of water, every acre of land stolen through Silas Drayton's fraud, now legally hers, mapped, sealed, unquestionable. She stood at the edge of her claim as snow drifted soft and steady across the valley. This was what she and Eli had stumbled into all those years ago. Land of untold value and danger. It was more than soil and springs. It was hard-earned justice bought with blood. Kairos stepped up beside her, Clara perched on his shoulders, Jude at his side, proud and tall. They were a family not by law, but by the battles they'd endured and the choices they'd made. Good ground for raising children who understand both worlds. Kairos said, eyes scanning the snowy terrain, half warrior, half farmer now. May nodded. The path ahead would never be easy. More storms would come, more trials. But they had learned how to stand together, blending strength, heritage, and purpose to build something lasting. The worst of the danger had passed. But the real work, building a future worth defending, was only beginning. That night they gathered at the dinner table with Jude, Clara, and the neighbors who had become more than friends. As firelight danced on the walls and the smell of stew filled the air, May felt something deeper than relief. Gratitude. What started with heartbreak had grown into a place of hope, and the lesson burned clear in her chest. True security didn't come from hiding, it came from rising with the right people beside you. As Kairos spoke the evening prayers, honoring both Christian grace and Apache tradition, May looked around the table. Jude and Clara sat tall, full of promise. Lyra, wise and nurturing, passed herbs and stories to anyone willing to learn. Doc Ray brought medicine into the frontier, merging science with grit. And Tessa Lane, she was raising the next generation, one lesson at a time. Outside the spring flowed steady, reliable. But the real power was inside that cabin, in the faith, loyalty, and shared dream they'd forged through pain and perseverance. Tomorrow would bring new battles. That was the way of the frontier. But May Arden no longer faced them alone. She and Kairos had proven that people from different worlds could stand together, not just to survive, but to thrive. What Robert had died over, those water rights, those lies, had been transformed into something new. A foundation of justice, of community, of life. And in the distance, carried by the wind, came the sound of wagon wheels and distant voices. New souls arriving in Willow Springs, drawn by a whisper of hope. May smiled. More families, more work, more wells to dig, and she welcomed it all. All stories are created for entertainment purposes and may include fictional elements or dramatized interpretations inspired by historical settings. We use AI tools, voiceover visuals, scripts, as creative assistants. However, all content is reviewed, refined, and edited by humans. To ensure emotional authenticity and storytelling quality, we fully comply with YouTube's policies regarding AI-generated content and do not use any deepfake techniques or misleading recreations of real individuals. All visuals and supporting materials are properly licensed. Sharing, re-uploading, modifying, or distributing any part of this content in any form requires written permission. We appreciate your support and respect for original creative work.